The galactic skyline stretched across the viewport, a shimmering sea of stars scattered like dust across an obsidian void. Humanity had clawed its way into this expanse, not as conquerors, nor as beggars, but as survivors, an anomaly in a cosmos that had long since settled into its own rigid hierarchy. Captain Elias Voss stood at the edge of the diplomatic chamber, his arms crossed, his gaze coolly assessing the council before him. The Grand Assembly of the Galactic Concord, an empire of oligarchs masquerading as benevolent caretakers, had called this meeting under the pretense of negotiation. But Elias had spent years navigating their politics, listening between the words. He knew better. The Vrakshul Dominion, the Concord's ruling faction, sat at the head of the chamber, their elongated forms draped in shimmering fabrics, expressions unreadable behind their translucent exoskeletal plates. To their left, representatives of the Kalos swarm, chitinous, multi-limbed entities that spoke in an unsettling symphony of clicks and reverberations, watched with what could only be described as hungry anticipation. Then came the words, cloaked in diplomatic pleasantries, but no less damning. The Vrakshul had brokered a peace with the Kalos, an accord to end their century-long war. The cost of that peace? Humanity's colonies, gifted to the swarm as tribute, a sacrifice on the altar of galactic stability. Elias felt the weight of the room shift, the presence of his team, scientists, diplomats, security officers, growing heavier in his periphery. They were waiting, trusting him to respond. He could already hear the carefully curated response forming in his mind, the feigned outrage tempered by diplomacy, the futile effort to appeal to a sense of justice that these beings did not possess. And yet, before he could even summon his words, the trap was sprung. Security forces stormed into the chamber, weapons drawn, their intentions clear. There would be no negotiation, no debate, only execution. Elias moved before his mind had fully processed the betrayal. Years of training, of surviving war zones and diplomatic crises, condensed into instinct. His pulse thrummed as he reached for his concealed blade, a relic from Earth's past, forged in an era where diplomacy had been just as often settled by steel as by words. The blade found its mark, slicing through the soft tissue beneath a Vrakshul. Guards' exoskeletal plates before the chamber exploded into chaos. Dr. Lara Saeed was already moving, her small frame darting toward the console at the far end of the chamber. Humanity's finest geneticist had never been much of a soldier, but she understood the value of information. The moment she reached the console, her fingers danced across the interface, transferring every bit of classified data she could extract. Onto a secure drive, the rest of the team fought to regroup, falling back toward the emergency access corridor. Plasma fire scorched the air, filling the chamber with the acrid scent of burned ozone. A security officer, a trusted friend, took a direct hit to the chest, crumpling without a sound. Elias didn't look back. He didn't have the luxury of mourning. The stolen ship was their only chance. A sleek, conquered stealth vessel, its design familiar yet undeniably alien. Lyra stumbled into the co-pilot seat, her breath ragged, hands trembling as she sealed the airlock behind them. As the ship burst into the void, alarms blaring across the station, Elias turned to face her. The look in her eyes said it all. Earth was already burning. The ship trembled under the strain of its abrupt departure, the stolen Concorde stealth vessel struggling to process an unauthorized escape vector. The sleek frame, built for covert operations, was barely holding together after the violent skirmish. Through the viewport, the diplomatic station shrank behind them, a polished monument of alien superiority now flashing with emergency lights. Defensive craft scrambled in pursuit. Lyra's hands moved with precision, rerouting auxiliary power to the ship's inertial dampeners. "They won't let us go without a fight," she muttered, sweat lining her brow. Elias's fingers danced. over the controls, activating the vessel's experimental cloaking field. The ship flickered out of sight, seamlessly blending into the star-strewn void. For a moment, silence held, save for the ambient hum of the ship's struggling systems. "They won't find us immediately," Elias said, eyes locked on the scanner. "But they're going to hunt us like animals." Lyra exhaled sharply, her voice tight. "We have to reach Fort Aegis. If Admiral Rook doesn't see this intel now, we won't get another chance." Elias nodded. Fort Aegis, hidden deep within. Jupiter's chaotic orbit was humanity's last bastion beyond the colonies. A place the Concorde had dismissed as an outdated military relic. A place that might now become the heart of resistance. Fingers moving with habitual speed, Elias plotted the jump. The drive whined in protest, the ship's stolen systems struggling to comply. A warning flashed, a minor power fluctuation. He ignored it. No time for hesitation. The moment the jump initiated, the cabin was bathed in a sickly blue light. The ship lurched, bending space around them as the stars smeared into luminous streaks. For a moment, the entire universe felt still before reality snapped back into place. Jupiter loomed ahead, its swirling storms a violent golden vortex of perpetual chaos. Nestled within an asteroid belt, obscured by sensor interference, lay Fort Aegis, a fortress of steel and ingenuity. Humanity's last line of defense. The ship's comm crackled to life. "Unidentified vessel, you have entered restricted space. Identify immediately or be destroyed." Elias wasted no time. "Captain Elias Voss, code Sierra Black 04. There was a pause, a hesitation. Then the automated defense grid flickered off. A massive hangar bay yawned open in invitation. The ship descended. The bay came alive with motion. Armed soldiers lined the landing pad, their weapons trained forward. Elias and Lyra exited quickly, knowing that hesitation would only earn them a plasma bolt to the chest. A uniformed officer stormed forward, eyes hard with suspicion. "Voss, you better have a damn good reason for breaking protocol." Lyra thrust a data drive into his hands. "Take this to Rook, now." The officer glanced at her, then at the drive, before snapping a command into his wristcom. Within moments, they were being escorted deeper into the fortress, past rows of battle-ready troops, engineers working feverishly over warship schematics, and intelligence officers monitoring incoming transmissions. The command chamber was a stark contrast to the chaos outside, silent, calculated, a place where decisions shaped the fate of billions. At the center stood Admiral Rook, his weathered face set in stone. The moment he saw Elias and Lyra, his gaze narrowed. "You were supposed to be at Concord negotiations," Rook said, his voice level but razor-sharp. Elias handed him the encrypted drive. "That negotiation was never meant to end in anything but our annihilation." Rook inserted the drive into the holotable. Streams of data unfolded before them. Classified communications, hidden military orders, the cold truth behind the betrayal. The Concorde had never intended to negotiate. Humanity's existence had been bartered away in secret. Their colonies offered up to the Kalos swarm in exchange for temporary peace. The Concorde saw humanity as nothing more than a disposable inconvenience. For a long moment, Rook stared at the data. Then, without a word, he turned and motioned for his staff. "Prepare for total war." Elias clenched his jaw. There was no turning back now. The battle for survival had officially begun. The weight of war settled over Fort Aegis like a brewing storm. Inside the war room, the air was thick with tension as intelligence officers and military strategists pored over data streams, fleet movements, and intercepted Concorde transmissions. The betrayal wasn't just political. It was a strategic move designed to cripple humanity before they even had a chance to resist. Elias stood at the edge of the command table, watching as Admiral Rook dissected the information Lyra had extracted. The Kalos swarm's warpath was clear. Humanity's colonies were next, and the Conquered had already rerouted its fleets to ensure no interference. "This isn't just a betrayal," Rook murmured, his gaze hard. "It's extermination." The room fell silent. Lyra, standing beside Elias, exhaled slowly. "If we don't act now, we lose everything." Elias turned his eyes to the holomap. "Then we stop playing defense." Rook lifted his gaze. "You have something in mind?" Elias nodded, his mind already racing ahead. "We don't have the numbers to fight the Conquered head-on, but we don't need numbers. We need chaos. We need to hit them where they don't expect it, where it hurts the most." Rook studied him, then glanced at the assembled officers. "Say what you're thinking." Elias leaned forward, tapping the holographic display. "We start with the drift colonies. They've been under Concord oppression for decades. Hard labor, brutal oversight, and no rights. But they're still human. If we give them a reason to rise, they will," Lyra added. "And they have the industrial infrastructure we lack. If we liberate them, we gain weapons, shipyards, and manpower." One of the officers scoffed. "You're talking about starting a full-scale insurrection against an enemy that outnumbers and outguns us 1,000 to 1. Elias met his gaze. "I'm talking about revolution." Rook nodded slowly. "We don't have the luxury of fear anymore." He turned to his officers. "Prepare a fleet. We're taking the drift colonies." The journey through the outer rim was treacherous. The drift colonies, massive orbital mining stations and industrial complexes built into the remains of shattered moons, were heavily policed by the Concord's enforcement units. These weren't battle-hardened soldiers. They were corporate enforcers, slavers and overseers who ruled through fear and oppression. As the human fleet approached Havenspire, one of the largest colonies, Elias stood at the helm of his ship, eyes fixed on the massive orbital station. This was where the war would truly begin. Lyra worked feverishly at the comms, broadcasting an encrypted message to the colony's underground resistance. The response was immediate, a surge of hidden channels, lighting up like fireflies in the void. The colony wasn't just ready to resist, they had been waiting for this moment. Elias turned to the fleet. "No drawn-out sieges, no unnecessary bloodshed. We strike fast, cut off their command, and let the people take back their own world." Rook's voice crackled over the comms. "We're with you, Captain. Let's show them what humanity does when it refuses to kneel." The battle for Havenspire was swift and brutal. The Concord's enforcers, used to dealing with disarmed laborers, were completely unprepared for a coordinated military assault. The human fleet descended like a vengeful storm, fighters weaving through the colony's industrial spires, disabling defense turrets before they could fire a single shot. Inside the station, Elias led the ground assault. The corridors were filled with smoke and the sound of gunfire as resistance fighters, fueled by years of oppression, overwhelmed the enforcer barracks. Plasma bolts carved through metal walls, explosions rattled the lower sectors, and screams of retreat echoed through the comms. Elias drove his blade into the chest of a retreating officer, wrenching it free with a grim efficiency. Beside him, Lyra was busy overriding the security mainframe, flooding the station's communication lines with a single message. "Havenspire is free. The revolution has begun." As the last remnants of Concord forces fell, the people of the drift colonies took to the streets, their voices rising in a single deafening cry. For Earth! For freedom! The galaxy had changed that day. Humanity was no longer just surviving. It was fighting back. The revolution spread like wildfire. The fall of Havenspire sent shockwaves through the Galactic Concord, shattering the illusion of humanity's submission. Across the drift colonies, workers and engineers seized control of industrial stations, turning shipyards into weapons factories and transport freighters into makeshift warships. But the Concorde was not idle. 3 weeks after the liberation of Haven Spire, the Vractial Dominion responded with overwhelming force. A fleet of conquered warships, led by the dreadnought Veil of Order, emerged from FTL above the colony. The sky darkened as thousands of mechanized infantry deployed in drop pods, crashing into the surface like a relentless meteor storm. Elias stood at the command center, his gaze locked on the tactical display. "They're not here to retake the colony," he muttered. "They're here to erase it." Lyra's face was pale. "They're going to make an example of us." Admiral Rook's voice came through the comms. "We have to hold them off. If we lose here, the revolution dies before it even begins." Elias clenched his fists. "Then we don't just hold, we break them." The battle erupted in fire and chaos. The human fleet, still vastly outgunned, used the terrain of the asteroid belt to its advantage, executing ambush tactics perfected over centuries of human warfare. Smaller, faster corvettes darted through the wreckage, unloading concentrated plasma barrages before vanishing into the debris fields. But the Veil of Order was a behemoth. Its massive plasma batteries ripped through human defenses, vaporizing entire squadrons in a single blast. One direct hit could annihilate Haven Spire. "We need to take out that dreadnought," Elias growled. Rook's response was grim. "We don't have the firepower." Lyra's fingers flew over her terminal. "Maybe not conventionally." She turned to Elias, her eyes blazing. "What if we turn their own weapons against them?" Elias frowned. "You're talking about infiltration." "I'm talking about hacking their command systems." Lyra's voice was sharp. "I can hijack their targeting array, force them to fire on their own fleet." Elias didn't hesitate. "Get me a strike team. We're boarding that ship." The assault on the Veil of Order was a suicide mission, and everyone knew it. The team of 10 infiltrators launched from a cloaked freighter, their stolen conquered suits hiding their human signatures. They navigated the dreadnought's outer hull, using mag clamps to stay anchored in the microgravity, before breaching an external maintenance hatch. The interior of the ship was a maze of sterile corridors, patrolled by Vractial sentries with plasma rifles. The team moved like shadows, dispatching guards with silent efficiency, making their way toward the command core. Lyra worked fast, interfacing with the mainframe. "I just need a few minutes." A klaxon blared. The Conquered had discovered them. Gunfire erupted as security forces swarmed the chamber. Plasma bolts scorched the walls, filling the air with the acrid scent of burning metal. Elias fought like a man possessed, his combat blades slicing through the exoskeletal armor of the Vractial. Lyra's voice was urgent. "Almost there! Just hold them off!" A blast knocked Elias off his feet. A Vractial officer loomed over him, weapon raised. But before the shot could land, a bullet tore through its skull. Rook's voice crackled through the comm. "You're not the only one who can do insane things, Voss," Lyra gasped. "Done!" The Veil of Order shuddered violently as its weapons turned on its own fleet. Plasma cannons unleashed destruction upon Allied warships, confusion spreading like wildfire. The Concorde formation collapsed, their disciplined assault turning into chaos. Elias grabbed Lyra's hand. "Time to go." The team barely made it back to the escape pod before the dreadnought's internal security systems locked down. As they jettisoned away, they watched the Veil of Order burn, its own fleet ripping it apart in a storm of friendly fire. The battle was over. Humanity had not just survived. It had won. But Elias knew this was only the beginning. The Concorde would not forget, and neither would humanity. The aftermath of the battle hung heavy over Haven Spire. The once bustling industrial hub now bore the scars of war, scorched docking bays, shattered walkways, and the debris of fallen Concorde warships drifting like silent ghosts in the void. Fires still smoldered in the lower districts where orbital bombardments had struck, and medical stations overflowed with wounded revolutionaries. Elias stood on an exposed platform overlooking the wreckage, the weight of victory pressing down. Harder than the battle itself, humanity had done the impossible. They had taken down the Veil of Order, one of the Concorde's most feared dreadnoughts, and driven an empire into retreat. But the cost was undeniable. Thousands were dead. Entire colonies had joined the fight, knowing there was no turning back. The Concorde would retaliate, and next time it would not underestimate humanity. Lyra approached, her face weary, streaked with grime and sweat. "They're pulling back," she said, nodding toward the shattered Concorde fleet limping into FTL. "For now." Elias exhaled slowly. "They'll be back with a vengeance." Admiral Rook stepped onto the platform beside them, his uniform singed, his eyes sharp as ever. "We sent a message today," he said, "one they'll never forget." Elias shook his head. "A message isn't enough. We just declared war on the most powerful empire in the galaxy. If we don't solidify what we started here, we won't survive the next battle." Rook crossed his arms. "You're right, which is why we need to move fast." He gestured to the holopad in his hand, displaying a network of human colonies and strategic points. "News of this victory is spreading. Other systems, even non-human ones, are considering rebellion. The Concorde has ruled through fear. But today we proved they can be beaten." Lyra frowned, rubbing her temple. "You think other species will actually side with us?" Rook smirked. "They don't have to like us. They just have to hate the Concorde more." Elias stared at the map, the weight of what they had started finally settling in. This wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. This was the beginning of something greater, a revolution. The following days were a blur of coordination, restructuring and mourning. Funerals were held across Haven Spire, and a temporary council was established to govern the newly liberated drift colonies. The message had gone out to the farthest reaches of human space. Humanity was no longer prey. Elias stood in the command center, watching encrypted messages flood in. Resistance movements from all corners of the galaxy were reaching out, offering support, seeking leadership. The Concorde's oppression had made countless enemies. Lyra sat beside him, scrolling through a decrypted Concorde transmission. Her expression darkened. "They're already regrouping. Multiple fleets consolidating in the core systems. They're calling us a rogue species now." Elias smirked grimly. "Guess we're officially outlaws." Rook's voice cut in from behind them. "Outlaws? No." He stepped forward, setting his hands on the table. "We're something far worse." Elias turned to him. "We're a threat." Silence settled between them, not the silence of defeat, but the calm before the storm. They had won a battle. Now they had to win the war. The stars stretched endlessly before them, a vast, untamed frontier now more uncertain than ever. Elias stood on the bridge of the Resolute, a retrofitted Concorde warship now serving as the flagship of the rebellion. The hum of the ship's systems, the distant chatter of officers coordinating their next moves, it all felt surreal. Haven Spire was secured, the drift colonies united under a new banner of defiance. Across the galaxy, whispers of revolt were turning into full-fledged uprisings. Humanity had struck a blow that could not be ignored, but the real war had only begun. Lyra stepped beside him, holding a datapad with an intercepted transmission. "You need to see this." Elias took it, his eyes scanning the message. An unknown fleet detected, not Concorde, not any known faction, approaching human-controlled space. His grip tightened. "More enemies?" Lyra hesitated. "Maybe. Or maybe something worse." The ship's comm crackled. "Sir, we're receiving a direct transmission. It's not encrypted." "Audio only," Elias nodded. "Put it through." The bridge fell silent as a deep, resonant voice filled the room. It was neither Concord nor human, it was something else entirely. "We have been watching. You were never meant to rise this far." The crew exchanged uneasy glances, and yet here you stand, unexpected, dangerous, perhaps worthy. The transmission ended abruptly. No coordinates, no further details. Just an open-ended statement that carried the weight of something vast, something unknowable. Rook's voice came from behind them. "Tell me that didn't sound like an invitation." Elias let out a slow breath. He turned to the crew, to the people who had already given everything for a cause that had once seemed impossible. "Set course. We find out who they are." No one questioned him. The ship lurched into FTL, streaking toward the unknown. The revolution had started with betrayal. It had turned into a war, and now it was about to become something much bigger than humanity itself.